Sure am I.
Hi, I'm Mark Lawson, president of Morningstar Music Publishers, and we want to welcome you to today's webinar. Today, we welcome our friend David Cherwien for a conversation about the use of organ in online worship services. David wears many different musical hats, including the director of the National Lutheran Choir and cantor at Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Minneapolis. He's also known for his work as a composer and for the many hymn festivals he plays around the country, although not right now. So, David, welcome. Glad that you're here.
Glad to be here. Glad to have you all here with me.
That's good. So let me add that there may be some volume issues today because David's going to be doing some demonstration on the organ, so you may want to be ready to turn your volume up or down depending upon how that comes through on your individual computer and system. The other thing we want you to know is that there are links to some resources that are in the description, the YouTube description, also available on our website on the link to find this session. And you can click on those resources and see what David has set there for you. One other thing I'd like to mention is that David has a variety of different publications and that you can easily find those by doing the composer search on our website in both organ and in choral. So we're going to stop with that and get started with our webinar today. So David, first of all, why don't you start by just kind of explaining what your situation is there at Mount Olive at the present time and how you're currently working with the worship services.
Yeah, well, we are, as we are saying here, in full exile. So we are not meeting at all as a congregation. There are no assemblies or meetings. Buildings essentially closed to groups larger than 10, I think. So we staff people are here, but little else is. And our Sunday liturgies are videos that we send out each week, and I'll be saying a lot more about those.
Okay, good. Well, we're going to get started, and if you have questions that you want to ask, please feel free to put them into the chat function, and we'll be monitoring those. And I'm going to turn it over to David. So thank you, David, for being here, and we look forward to what you have to say.
Great. Well, I'd like to welcome you all to the gallery at Mount Olive Lutheran Church. There's been a lot of magic that's happened in this balcony. This is where Paul Mons, of course, served for 30-some years. And after Paul Mons, Mark Zedio, my immediate predecessor, was here for 16, 17 years, and then I've been here close to 20. So the three of us span quite a number of years. But there's been a lot of singing that these walls have heard, and organ music. And this is the Schlicker organ that Paul Mons and Hermann Schlicker designed in mid-1960s. And I've really, really enjoyed this instrument. So one day I had a parishioner come up to me and goes, "Your instrument is not the organ." And I went, it is. I'm an organist. Da, da, da. But he says, "Your instrument is the congregation. That's the instrument that you helped do its music." And I thought about that because that's really true. And it's really the organ along with other things like the choir here or other instruments that we're now more and more adding to congregation singing, like piano, guitar, drums, individual instruments, and even books and resources like worship folders have that same purpose of facilitating that instrument, the assembly's voice, in doing what it needs to do. That's our main thing. So that's been an important concept for me to keep in my heart during this pandemic time. Because for some, it might just be a matter of making sure that we include organ music in our Sunday liturgies that get to our parishioners. But for me, it's a matter of understanding how am I offering something here with the organ that helps the assembly do its singing, even though the assembly is not here. The assembly is in exile. And we leaders, we're now facing cameras and microphones instead of live human beings waiting to breathe and sing. So I think we're learning a new understanding of how we are assembling as people of God. So we leaders, again, need to imagine a lot. We have to imagine that there are listeners at the other end, like I'm doing right now. I have no idea how many of you are out there. I see no faces. I just have to imagine that you're there. And we have to imagine that there are listeners, that there are participants, that there are people watching. And most importantly, we have to imagine their response. And that may sound like, well, duh, but the thing is, for my purposes, I have to assume that they are participating and singing instead of assuming they're just watching like another TV show. That what we prepare for them to use for their at-home liturgies on Sundays presumes that they're actually going to sing along with us. But that's harder to do for two reasons. One, the whole point of hymnody and the assembly singing is that there are others singing with us. So we have many people kind of softening the blow of hearing our own voice all by itself. So that already is kind of a blow. And the other thing is it gets hard also when there are just two people at a microphone trying to sing a hymn, and that's a different manner of joining something like that than it is joining a group of vibrant singing. So that's a big challenge for us in this time. And whether we're streaming or recording, we have to be aware of how that process affects the sounds of the organ and what that might do to what might happen between what I'm hearing live here and what comes out the speakers of whatever they're participating in, our computer speakers, for example. What are they doing? Because there's this big thing called compression that is often automatic with microphones and sound systems and the way they get broadcast out. Compression softens the louds and loudens the softs so that it brings them all and makes them a little more similar. And so and that process can also reduce high tones and diminish low tones, because we know what happens when a car comes by and all of us are shaking, which happens here often during the quietest prayer. Of course, some car comes by with a bass booming and all of the pews are vibrating with that bass in the trunk. But a low sound on the organ may not come through as well. So I'm going to demonstrate some sounds to just show how we might do things a little bit differently. So an 8-foot principle might move a microphone meter on a device you're recording with as much as the full organ. It might show about the same decibels because compression's doing its thing. So I think just being aware of that is a huge thing to start with. And it can inform other things too. Probably something that I always discipline myself to think about is less is more when something like this is at work, something like compression. So a fortissimo might be just as effective with less. For example, here's a full organ without a lot of things. To the ears on the equipment that people are listening in on might be just as effective as the real full organ. Of course, when you put them back to back like that, you may hear a huge difference. You go, what's he talking about? There's a big difference there. But sometimes a lot of equipment would take the real full organ and distort it. And it would get, it would have an opposite effect of what you'd want to have. The other thing that would come through very clearly for the listeners on electronic playback equipment is lighter textures. So varying textures like a reed, a light reed. So that's just a crumb horn with a 4-foot flute and 1 1/3 added to it to give it brilliance. But you can hear that as a very different color than a flute 8 and 4. So making sure that there is good contrast and very obvious contrast with the colors that you draw out on the organ will come through. So you can get big and fat probably should have worded that a little bit differently. You can get the organ to have a nice big full sound. Or something that's bubbly and happy. That's a flute, 8-foot, 4-foot, and 1-foot. I love the 1-foot stop in this organ. If you don't have a 1-foot stop, you can get one by bringing a 2-foot flute up at the swell down to the grade up an octave, and that's the same thing. Oh, I forgot the flute 8 and 4. Here we go. So if you don't have a 1-foot flute, there are still ways of getting at that particular sound. And of course, the warm, soft sound. The thing that I'm finding with the soft sounds on the organ is that they're much louder in a microphone. So when I'm gathering a small group to record like a psalm setting, which we'll talk about a little bit later, I have to go to the softest sound on the organ. And then when I listen later, I'm shocked at how big that sound is relative to the 4 singers. So it's just being aware of those varieties and how the microphone interprets it. Where the microphone is very, very important as well. If I've got mics on a stand right behind me, which is what I like to do, the Repositive, which is, if I turn the computer a little bit, you can see the pipes there. Right here, that's the Repositive. Those are very present and would come through and dominate everything if I'm not aware that they're there. So I usually don't use that division when I'm working with a small ensemble up here in the balcony or trying to accompany them, because that's what the microphones will be here. And you also have to be aware of who's controlling those microphones. Boy, do we hand off a lot of musical power and decision-making to people who are in those booths, don't we? There are times when I hear soloists mic'd, and probably should be mic'd a little bit less, but that's called good stewardship, making somebody sound as best as possible. Sometimes that means turning that knob down a little bit. I hope that wasn't offensive. But many are live streaming right now, and there are many things about that that are wonderful. And I'm certainly envious of those places that are so well set up to do that. We are not here at Mount Olive. We don't even have Wi-Fi. For this event, I had to run a 175-foot cord here to get the internet up here in the balcony. But we're working on that. But the churches that are all set to do that, it makes it easier to do something like that. But there are other things about live streaming that we found here at Mount Olive aren't right for us. And I want to share with you a little bit more about what we're doing here, because I suspect there might be others of you out there who don't have a lot of equipment to work with and have to make the best of what you have with small amounts of resources, financially and technologically. It doesn't take much to do a lot, I've discovered and learned. As a 63-year-old, I'm learning all sorts of things I never thought I would have to when I went to college. So one thing that's a huge value at this congregation with these people is the hymnity. And we mean that with full-bodied, full-voiced singing in creative ways and lots of improvisational treatments to the hymns with the accompaniments, most of the time with organ, but not always, and with a good amount of diversity from Hymnity's background. And for that reason, we found it not satisfying enough to be without that assembly sound when we're adding that kind of music to what we send out for people to do at home. So we have opted to, rather than stream here and go through the expense and steps to get to that, we opt to go with a hybrid video that we send home for people to do liturgy at home with. And those videos include, the hybrid means there are some things that are from pre-recorded sources from years back, and many things on this video that are new every single week. And the important thing that we presume is that people are actually doing the liturgy doing the singing and not only watching. Now, of course, people are going to be just watching. That doesn't mean we should send out somebody to knock on their door and say, hey, you're just watching. We don't know because we're imagining, remember? So I'm going to go with the imagining their singing part and gear what I'm offering for them to that assumption. There are some things in that video that really need to be new and very current relative to what's going on in the world. And of course, that would be, especially at the top of that list, would be the sermon and the prayers. And the sermons are recorded each week, and the prayers are recorded each week. Now, we could record them here, but the worship committee said, no, let's not do that because it's not the truth. We can't be here. So even the pastors and the leaders, we can't worship here either. So those are recorded from their homes or offices and then added as videos to the whole of the liturgy. Hymnity is where I want to spend some time with now. What we have found is that we've got 8 years of digital recordings of our liturgies here, which we did for shut-ins, for people that couldn't come and wanted to listen to the liturgy at home. We record them digitally and then send out CDs. Little did we know that we would become the shut-ins that we were making those for back then. So that means for 8 years, each Sunday, or each liturgy, if it's many more than Sundays alone, have 4 to 6 hymns. And so we can extract from those recordings of those hymns that are vibrant and full of the spontaneity that can happen here, and full of all kinds of things that can happen here, like babies and coughing and sneezing, and those things some recording engineers might want us to take out, but we leave them because that's an important part of what it means to be community. So what we do is extract that recording as a WAV file, and we put that WAV file into iMovie, and then we create some slides on PowerPoint that provide people with music. So I'm going to show you what some of those slides are. So I'm going to share my screen. And now you can see my whole screen and my whole life before me. Especially take a look at this folder right here. It's insults and gags for Robert Hobby. It's a thing he and I have going. Ha ha! There you go, Bob. So here comes, these are the PowerPoint slides for Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. So there's a title page with the credits, and we put copyright information at that point, which is very important to do. And then the music and words for that stanza only are created as PowerPoint slides, which we then import to iMovie to create the video portion of the iMovie. So in the end, I forgot to pull up iMovie. I'll show you what it looks like once something is actually in. You'll find another hymn. This is iMovie. And it's loading there in God's Garden, which we had yesterday. So you see the bottom green part is the sound file, and above here I insert these slides as pictures, and then we can do artwork when the organist does an extra long introduction. So but the end result, I thought it would be interesting for us to actually listen to, or you could sing along if you'd like, the hymn Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. 2019 Epiphany 4 Series C. So all that information is there for people to know when that recording was made. So it's live. It's not something that we concocted just to present. But that does allow for some interesting things. For example, when you put things in iMovie, you can edit. So maybe that's cheating in some ways. So here's an introduction to something. Forward. Stanza 1. Stanza 1 was from one Sunday and the others were from some other time. It allows that, but we let people know about that, and you notice a little one license net notice there. That's very important. It doesn't take much to do that, to make sure that you're covered legally when you're doing that. But we have found this to be a very meaningful part of what we send out every Sunday. And I'm thinking that could even be possible. I don't know the answer to this, so I'm venturing where I shouldn't. I got distracted by, never mind, I forgot what my point was. Kevin said it was too loud, and that caught my attention. Anyway, so I think people find this very, very meaningful to have that liturgy. Oh, I know what I was going to say, that even for those who stream, I would ask the question, is it possible to insert a hymn that way during a streamed event? That would be something that would be important. We will shift to streaming here at Mount Olive once we are able to also have an assembly gather, so that not just leaders, but also an assembly, even if it's a slightly smaller number, but an assembly that can sing. And that would be because we want people that are unable to come or in such a high-risk group shouldn't come before we're in the total all clear. Now, one other form of music that we include in those videos is new recordings every week, so that we do have a combination of pre-recorded material and then things that we do brand new each week. And while the choir can't assemble right now, we can't rehearse, we can't bring more than 10 people in, but I can bring in quartets. And so I sent a note to the choir, how many of you would be comfortable enough coming in groups of 4? And we're spaced out. If I can move the camera, and you'll see we've got in this corner a music stand, and then up here is another one, and then another one in that corner, another one behind me. So those are all set up for groups of 4 to come and record. And they typically do the psalm setting for the coming Sunday, so it's something brand new. And then I'll compose a very simple tone for them or an antiphon that works well with 4 people. But it's really important to not, I find that I have to go just with the smallest amount of sound on the organ as possible. Because with the one microphone here, using my iPhone, that's all I need to record this, picks up those 4 voices very well, but also the organ in great abundance. And so I have to make sure that I've got as soft a sound on it as I can imagine. And then if we do an antiphon, I try to use some very transparent sounds on the organ. So I'm going to share my screen again and show you what, and have you hear what it sounds like for a psalm. So first of all, I introduce the tone. That's my softest A fourth and flute box is closed. Using very little organ. I'll skip ahead. Verse 8. That's 4 singing. at the end there, I thought since we're done singing, I slapped on the 32-foot reed. So if I'm just with this drum horn, I add the 32-foot reed to that. It's like a big fat bassoon. Well, before I go back off of sharing screen, here's the end of, oops, that's the same one. Psalm 149. I was kind of itching for a little more organ at the end. Well, that's the one we just did. Sorry. Going back to Psalm 114. Come on. At the end, I wanted to go ahead and let go. And so we recorded it twice in case the organ was overpowering, but I decided to let it go. So they sing an antiphon. Those kinds of organ kicks at the end of something full-bodied was something I learned from my predecessor, Paul Mons. And he was here one Sunday and I did something like that. He jumped and said to his neighbor, now I know what I did to people all those years. But I love that effect. It's a way of using a full organ without drowning this quartet out because they're done. You know, just let them go a cappella for the antiphon and then let the full organ speak so that we do get to use the full organ. But this gathering quartets has been very important because what that also does is keep the choir engaged. And the four people, when they come to sing, all say the same thing. And I try to pass that around as much as I can. This is so wonderful to do. I miss this so much. And, you know, I think there's a very important part of that, whether we use the recording or not, but I, of course, always do. To record them, it's a very simple thing that I have. It's a Shure microphone hooked into my iPhone, and I think we have in the resources it shows something about this mic. It costs about $200 some to buy this, and an app goes into the iPhone, so it records in stereo and creates a WAV file, which then I just airdrop onto my iMac in my office, which then I drop into iMovie and add the slides above it that I've created in PowerPoint. So it's all stuff that's very accessible. And if this 62-year-old could figure it out, I bet you can too. So here's my proposition for you. If this microphone was a $200 some expense, well worth it. That if you've got a $500 annual budget for new music, use $200 for this and then spend the other $300 buying music for Advent Christmas of 2021 now, so that we need to support our publishers. Mark didn't ask me to say this, but they are in desperate need of the business that they've been losing from the pandemic as well. So why not plan ahead, buy now, and then you don't lose this year's budget money, and you can add next year's to it and spend even more. But using that for something like a microphone was very well worthwhile for those of us that don't have $100,000 consoles, mixing consoles in our galleries for other people to use. So the other thing that I record now as much as I can each week and include as brand new recording is prelude and postlude material. Even though we've got 8 years of preludes and postludes I could use from our recordings, I'm disciplining for as much as possible. I can't do it every week, but as much as possible to create new ones, because I can very safely come here and practice. I'm afraid I don't have an excuse. I saw a really cute post the other day about there's a dog sniffing out those musicians who aren't practicing, and then you suddenly see the nose of this dog in the screen. Well, sometimes I feel like that. You just have to discipline ourselves to get up here and spend time with the organ, and having that requirement of getting something recorded using that same setup, the iPhone setup, for each Sunday has been very, very important to do. Of course, you know, it could happen like as often does in the church. Right about the time I started doing that, recording preludes and postludes, the building committee decided, hey, now's a good time to refinish the wood in all the pews. So boom, I'm out of the nave. We've got the organ covered up for 4 weeks. Couldn't do it anymore. But anyway, I think that that's probably what we'll stop there and just let questions take us from here. And if there aren't any, well, then we can all go have lunch. But I hope that there's been something helpful here for you. And certainly if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. The introduction to Joyful, Joyful, You Adore Thee that you heard on that video was from this book, Joyful Praise, which is a Morning Star publication, of course. I did neglect one thing I had all set up to do and forgot. Using hymn concertato settings can be very effective in this context as well. So rather than just simply playing the hymn as an introduction, you can use whatever's printed in a piece like this. And you could even have your choral quartet, record the choral stanza for 3 and isolate that and insert it in the iMovie at that point in the service. Because this just begins with a simple flute. So it's a continuum. So that's a nice character color. Joy to the World here would be, which is an octavo for congregation, for choir, really, but it's something used, just the organist could use with a very transparent sound, like maybe principal 8 with mixture, and that's all. I've only got 2 stops on the grade, principal 8 and mixture, and use the reed for the trumpet, so those contrasting colors really come through. So it's a real Handel-esque setting that you can use. Actually, it's inspired by once hearing Paul Mons do this as an interlude. Which I thought was brilliant, putting Handel together. But octavos work beautifully for this kind of hymnody, and there are many, many settings. A couple of weeks ago, we did Bob Hobby's Beloved God's Chosen, and used the concertato setting with the soloist, who we recorded it up here ahead of time. So there.
Good. Well, I was just going to ask about that because I knew that you used those concertatos quite a bit. Another question I have is, when you're noted for doing organ stanzas during the congregational singing, where the congregation watches the text, do you indicate that on your slides? How do you do that?
Yep, it would be just like it showed with the children's choir. It would say interpreted by the organ, and I would just have the text alone and not the melody, which would suggest they should sing, but only the text that the organ is interpreting.
I've thought that this is a good time to, if you don't have that tradition in your repertoire, that it's a good time to add it because of the way it works right now.
And there are scads and scads of organ books full of interpretations and that depict those texts. Michael Burkhart last week talked about Paul Mons' St. Anne, using St. Anne that way, and some of Michael's books, and certainly any of mine. Those are all interpreting texts somewhere, and I think are very valuable for that purpose, just to insert a stanza.
Right. Good. Well, we didn't get too many questions. I'm sure they may come later, but we will always answer those. But I really thank you for doing this today. It was very informative and great to see how you are functioning during this time in your particular congregation. And I realize that everyone's situation is different, and that we all have to adapt and work at this the best that we can. So, well, thank you very much. And we hope that you have a very good day and that things continue to go well for you.
Yes, I wish that for all of you as well. Thank you.
All right. Just before we leave, why don't you put in a plug for the National Lutheran Choir Christmas program, because you can watch that visually this year.
Yes, both are All Saints on November 1st, and the Christmas program in second weekend in December will be virtual offerings. And you can go to www.nlca.com and find out more information. Yeah, there'll be free programs that'll be virtually produced. Very similar to what I just said here, a combination of newly recorded with previously recorded things, but pieced together in an artful way to create a whole and a flow.
Good. We did have one question that popped in while you were answering that. They asked if you have a suggestion on how to record a singer and organ with the ability to control the balance of the volumes of each, because they're trying to record on their iPad and it doesn't necessarily get the balance right. Are you having that issue?
It all depends on where that microphone is. And if you have two microphones, one for the singer, it's easy to forget that that microphone will also be hearing the organ if they're in the same room. So either have to create the balance. I think listening with headphones is probably the only way to know how it's going, or do a test recording and then listen with headphones to hear. But you can get more sound out of a singer. But I think it's better to try to balance as much acoustically as possible. That will always come off better, being filtered through the electronic processes that they will go through regardless. If you add more organ, the compression starts kicking in, and then the singer might get out of balance. So I would always just listen and try to place the singer. I move the singer before adjusting volumes, so that they are closer to the mic, and even pointing a microphone away from the organ and maybe having the singer facing the microphone and the organ back behind there, that might help. I would try to do that kind of physical moving things around before just trying to do knobs, because that will probably not be as helpful.
Yeah, I think one thing I've learned over the years from the work in the recordings of doing recordings is that things in the room do not necessarily sound like they do when they're coming through the microphones. And so you have to just really experiment.
Right. We always do a little test run, and I listen with headphones when we're doing this recording. But seriously, this would work with an iPad as well. This little microphone, it has a plug-in that goes into the iPhone or an iPad, and it changed the sound hugely. So that $200 expense was really well worth it. And
David sent us a PDF of that, and it's a link to that is also on our website, and probably in the description by now. So, well, thank you, David, and thanks again, and good luck. And we really appreciate all your work.
Thank you, and also Mark.